Ever heard a phrase so often it almost starts to lose its meaning? It's just tossed around. You're like, yeah, I know that one.
Happens all the time, right?
Totally. And today we're tackling one of those no taxation without representation. I mean, you definitely remember it from history class, but
Oh, absolutely. It's one of those big ones.
it's a big one. But trust me, there's so much more to this story than just memorizing the definition.
It's way more than just a slogan.
Exactly. We're going way beyond that. We're tracing this idea back through time, like all the way back.
Oh, this is going to be good.
It is. We're trying to understand why it resonated so powerfully back then, and honestly,
Now we're still talking about it now.
exactly why it still matters. So, to tick things off, imagine this. It's the 1700s.
Okay, 1700s. Got it.
You're living in the British colonies. Life's not perfect.
Never is.
Never is. But on the plus side, taxes are pretty low, and you've got some self-governance going on, so
Things aren't too bad, relatively speaking.
not too bad at all.
Right, right. This is what some historians call, benign neglect, where colonies are kind of doing their own thing.
I've heard that.
It wasn't necessarily intentional, just, colonies are far away. It was easier for the crown to let them manage their own business.
Out of sight, out of mind, kind of.
Exactly, until, of course, it all blows up.
And what usually throws a wrench into things?
So let me guess, war.
Always war. And in this case, the 7 Years' War, or the French and Indian War over here, really drained Britain's bank account.
Yeah, wars are expensive.
So protecting those colonies wasn't cheap, and naturally, Britain figured, hey, colonists, time to chip in a little more.
It makes sense on the surface, right? We need money, you guys benefit from our protection, everyone pays up.
Sounds fair.
But that's where things get interesting.
It wasn't just about the money.
It wasn't.
Not really.
Right.
It was about how that money was being raised. You see, colonists were used to having a say in things through their local assemblies.
Local representation and all that.
Right. The idea of Parliament way across the ocean levying taxes without their direct consent, that did not sit well.
So it wasn't just being stingy, it was about principle.
100%. And this whole idea that there should be limits on the power to tax. The colonists didn't just pull that out of thin air.
Oh, really? Where'd they get it from then?
Remember that little document, the Magna Carta?
Vaguely, yeah. Big old important paper, right? That's the one. 1215, signed, sealed, delivered. It's essentially the seed for this whole no taxation without representation thing. Now, the Magna Carta was mostly about the king and the English barons, limiting the king's power, but it set a huge precedent. Even the king couldn't just go around demanding taxes. He needed some form of consent.
So fast forward a few centuries, and
Yeah.
it's the same issue just with different players.
You got it. King Charles I tries to sidestep Parliament to get some taxes, and bam! The Petition of Right in 1628 happens.
Which basically reiterated the whole Magna Carta thing.
Exactly. They doubled down on that idea of consent being non-negotiable.
And the colonists thought, hold on, we inherited those rights too, right?
Right.
Being British and all.
Precisely. They saw themselves as heirs to that tradition, those rights. So when Parliament starts imposing taxes without their direct representation, it felt like a betrayal.
Wow.
And these weren't just dusty old documents to them. This was personal. This was their inheritance, their rights being trampled on.
It's like finding out your great-great-great-great-grandfather hid a clause in the family will, and now you're exempt from chores.
Exactly. You better believe they were going to bring it up when they needed to.
You'd be foolish not to. But it's more than just holding on to old documents, right? These taxes really impacted their lives.
Oh, absolutely. This directly threatened their livelihoods, their businesses. It wasn't some abstract concept. It was hitting them where it hurt.
So in this climate, who emerges as the voice of this discontent?
Well, there were a few, actually, but you can't talk about this without mentioning James Otis.
Okay, James Otis. Set the scene for us. What's going on when he jumps into the ring?
So it's 1764, things are heating up, and Otis punishes this pamphlet. And he's arguing that taxation without representation, it wasn't just a bad idea, it was against the entire foundation of the British Constitution.
This is James Otis, fiery pamphlet guy, right?
Prince of One.
What exactly was his argument?
He called it the rights of the British colonies asserted and proved.
Catchy.
Right. And in it, he compares the colonist situation to, get this, the miserable state of tributary slaves.
Wow. Okay, so he's directly connecting taxation without representation and slavery?
He went there. It was a really powerful analogy, even if it was a little extreme for the time, but it shows you how high the stakes felt. This wasn't just about money. It was about freedom, autonomy. Their identity as Englishmen was on the line.
It's about who they were at their core.
Exactly.
So then the Sugar Act happens in 1764. And now I know, this actually lowered the tax on molasses.
It did.
It did.
Right, but it was more about cracking down on all that smuggling that was going on, making sure those taxes were actually collected.
So it was more about control than the actual money.
Exactly.
So how did the colonists react to this Sugar Act?
Well, enter Samuel Adams, another firebrand.
Of course, it's always Sam Adams.
He picks up that connection to slavery and runs with it. He's arguing that being taxed without having any elected representatives to speak for your interests, that's basically being denied your basic rights, much like enslaved people.
It's taking away your agency, your voice.
Exactly.
And this idea, it catches on, doesn't it?
Big time. It becomes this really powerful argument against these new policies. And here's the kicker. Colonists actually paid far less in taxes than those living in Britain at the time.
Wait, really? So it wasn't even about the amount they were paying?
It was the principle. They were being denied a fundamental right. It's like, imagine someone trying to charge you for something you've always gotten for free.
Oh, I'd be furious.
Right. Even a small fee suddenly feels like a huge injustice.
Totally. And this, I'm guessing, is where things really start to escalate.
Oh, things definitely escalated, because then comes the Stamp Act of 1765. No more messing around with molasses. We're talking a tax on every piece of paper you can imagine.
Newspapers, legal documents, even playing cards.
Playing cards.
It was a direct attack on their ability to do business, communicate, basically live their lives. Yeah, I wouldn't be happy about that. So what do? Just grumble about it and carry on.
Not a chance. This is where it gets really interesting. Think tarring and feathering those poor tax collectors.
Oh, right.
The Liberty Tree becoming the symbol of protest, the Sons of Liberty forming. This was way beyond grumbling. It was straight up defiance.
The revolution was brewing, right?
Oh, absolutely. And this wasn't just a Boston thing. Remember the Stamp Act Congress?
Come in.
Okay, so October 1765. Delegates from 9 colonies, which was a huge deal back then.
A big deal, yeah.
They come together to formally oppose these British policies. It's a real turning point.
So are we talking strongly worded letters? What are they doing?
Basically, they said, look, it's essential to the freedom of a people that no taxes be imposed without their consent, either directly or through their representatives. Sound familiar?
It's like they took it straight from the Magna Carta.
Exactly. And it worked. Kind of.
Kind of.
The Stamp Act was repealed in 1766. But Parliament wasn't giving up that easily.
Always a but. There's always a but.
Always. Enter the Declaratory Act, passed right alongside that repeal.
Sneaky, sneaky.
Right. And it states very clearly that Parliament had the right to legislate for the colonies in all cases whatsoever.
Wow. It's like, we'll give you this one, but don't forget who's really in charge.
Exactly. 1 step back, 2 steps forward.
So the fight's not over.
Not even close. It just keeps going. The Townshend Acts, the Tea Act, you name it, each one chipping away at the colonists' trust in British rule.
It's pushing them closer and closer to revolution.
And here's a wild fact for you. The exact phrase, no taxation without representation, it first appears in a London newspaper. I know, in 1768. It's ironic, isn't it?
The irony.
But it shows you the power of language, how an idea can travel across oceans and become this rallying cry.
And this one stuck.
It stuck because it perfectly captured that core issue of the revolution, the fight for self-determination.
It's bigger than tea, it's bigger than taxes. It's about having a voice.
It's about shaping your own destiny. And that's why this phrase still resonates today. It reminds us how important civic engagement is, holding those in power accountable, fighting for a just and representative society.
It's a legacy that goes all the way from that field in Runnymede with the Magna Carta right to today.
So next time you hear that phrase, no taxation without representation, don't just let it go in one ear and out the other.
Really think about it.
What does it really mean? What are the injustices that get you fired up today? What issues make you want to stand up and say, no, not without my voice being heard?
Because history isn't just dates and names in some textbook. It's a conversation.
And it's still going on.
And we all have a role to play.